Hello guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Basil. Today I'm going to talk about the top 10 books that I read in 2022. Now I tried to narrow down the list to 10 books, but it was a very difficult task because I read so many good books in 2022. Now I'm going to show the books in the order that I read them in, and it's not a ranking of how good the book is. The first book on my list is called Timeline by Michael Crichton. This is the author that wrote Jurassic Park. It's a very famous novel that was turned into a series of movies. I didn't read Jurassic Park, but I happened to have a copy of Timeline, another very famous novel by this author, and it did not disappoint me at all. It was a very good read. This book talks about a group of archaeologists that are digging a site in France from the medieval period. The chief archaeologist is then summoned to this big American corporation which is funding the digging, and suddenly this guy disappears. His team gets worried and they start investigating, and they learn that this big American corporation has invented time travel and they want to test it, and they send this archaeologist to medieval France to check what happened in medieval France, but he gets stuck in time and he can't return, and now it's up to his team to go back in time and save him. This novel is about 500 pages long, but it didn't feel this way at all because it's so fast-paced and action-packed and very entertaining. I just couldn't put it down. I kept flipping the pages rapidly just to know what's going to happen. It's filled with useful historical information and scientific theories that are not boring at all, and I'm definitely going to check Michael Crichton's other books, and this is only the start. The second book on my list is called 4321. This is a gigantic book. It's a door stopper. It's almost 800 plus pages long, and I loved every minute of reading it. Now this book talks about a guy called Archie Ferguson. The book starts with his childhood until his teenagehood, and then something happens. The narrative splits into 4 different scenarios, 4 different parallel universes of the same guy. Each choice he makes is different in all 4 universes. Like when he graduates from high school, in one branch he goes to a university, in another he doesn't, in the other he goes to a different university. So his future is decided by his actions and his decisions. So we have 4 different stories in one. Also, his interactions with the characters around him are different in each universe. So for example, there's this one girl. In one universe she's just a friend, in the other she's his girlfriend, and in the other she's just an acquaintance and he doesn't know her very well, and so on. Through this guy's life we learn so much of America's history from the 40s to the 70s, because that's when the story takes place. It includes many things from cultural movements to civil rights movements. It's got everything. I really like the book. It's very enjoyable, very informative, and it's a very deep dive in history and culture. And this book was shortlisted for the 2017 Booker Prize, but it did not win. Some downfalls to this book: I felt it a little bit confusing. You have to really focus which version of Archie you're reading right now, because the characters are the same in all the universes, but their actions are different, and so you get confused. Wait, this girl is his girlfriend, right? Or no, wait, no, this is the other Archie. Yeah, that was a tough read, but it was worth it. And the endings are also worth it because they are very different from each other. And I think that each version of this guy's life could have been a standalone novel because it's that rich. The third book on my list is called Madame Bovary. It's a French classic novel from the 1800s. And this novel was famous at the time of its publication because the author went to trial in France because the people thought that some things in the novel were too obscene for that time. A girl who marries a doctor called Bovary, and she moves with him to a village where he works. This girl is very ambitious and she doesn't settle very well, and she's very bored, and we follow her as she tries to overcome this boredom and this stagnation in her life, and she does very, very horrible things to her and her husband. I really loved the writing style. The novel was very very smooth and very enjoyable. There are so many lessons we learn from this novel. One of them is we learn to be content with our lives, try to improve our lives, but in decent ways, not like Madame Bovary did. The author actually made us hate the main character because of her despicable actions. This is what the lawyer of Gustave Flaubert said in his trial to defend the author. I hated Madame Bovary very much, and I hated her very naive and stupid husband. The best character in this novel was the pharmacist. He was very witty and funny and has some really smart remarks on society and religion and so on. And I felt like he was the real voice of the author. The fourth novel on my list is called Recursion by Blake Crouch. This guy wrote the very famous science fiction novel Dark Matter, which I really enjoyed in the past. So I decided I need to check his next book, and this was very phenomenal. I really loved it. It has one of the newest concepts of time travel, one of the most fascinating ones that I have ever read before. This novel talks about an NYC cop who is investigating a syndrome called false memory syndrome, in which people suddenly remember things that happened to them, but they didn't actually happen to them. And so they think that they live double lives. At the other end, there's a neuroscientist who is trying to restore the memories of Alzheimer patients. And she wants to invent a device to record their memories so they can watch them later and remember them. How these two people will interact and how their stories will intersect, I can't say much because it will spoil a lot of the novel. All I can say is it was very fun to read, very gripping style, and definitely a page turner, and I can't wait to read his next book. Next book on my list is actually a nonfiction. I have been trying to read more nonfiction, and one of my goals next year is to read more nonfiction books. The book is called Prisoners of Geography by Tim Marshall. This book takes 10 maps of the most powerful nations in the world, and he analyzes the geopolitical relationships between those nations. We discover so many interesting facts. The book is very informative and gives you a new perspective on the relationships between nations, like a range of mountains or an ocean decides foreign policies for some countries. It's very mind-boggling, and I really love the writing style, how everything was explained in very plain language. It was very easy to understand. The next book on my list is called The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton. Now, this is one of the toughest books that I read last year, and it's very tough to explain what it's about. It's a very big book, almost 850 pages long, and I almost gave up in the middle of it because you get a little bit frustrated in the beginning to understand what's going on. The story takes place in 19th century New Zealand in the gold rush, and this guy named Walter Moody enters a bar and he discovers that there is a secret meeting between 12 men who don't want him to be there. We discover that they are discussing a murder that happened in town. At first you think this is a murder mystery book, and it is a murder mystery book, but it's so much more than that. The book is structured in a very weird and fascinating way. There is a connection between the moon cycle and planets' movements and the characters and their actions. The chapters are divided based on the moon cycle. The first chapter is almost half of the book. That's why I got really frustrated. I wanted to finish the first chapter and I didn't know what's going on because there are so many characters in this book and you need to be really focused on so you don't lose your mind. But then after the 50% mark, things start to get really quick because all the chapters begin to shrink in size until the last chapter is only one page. Very interesting structure of a book, and it makes you uneasy and it's very challenging, but I really liked it. One very frustrating aspect of this novel at first is that it is written in a language to resemble the 19th century novels like Charles Dickens novels. The language is a little bit tough, but after a time you get used to it and then it flows amazingly fast. The novel actually won the Booker Prize of 2013, and it's the biggest book that has ever won this prize. And I think it deserves it because the reading experience is very different and fresh and challenging. Book number 7 on my list is called The Wind Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami. Now, I love Haruki Murakami and I want to read all of his books. His books are very weird and you just enjoy reading them, and to enjoy them you have to go with the flow, you have to go with the ride. You don't have to understand everything. He makes you go into these weird worlds and you have to suspend your disbelief and enjoy the ride. And this book is not different. This book starts with this guy who is unemployed and his wife's cat suddenly disappears and he has to look for it, and his journey takes him on very different events. He meets so many weird characters, and suddenly the story takes a detour to World War II, what happened in Manchuria between Japan and Russia. And content warning, there are some really gory scenes in this novel. If you don't like that, it's a trigger warning. Like I said, you have to read it and enjoy the ride because I can't explain much. Next book on my list is called Pet Sematary by Stephen King. I read many books of Stephen King and I enjoyed some and I didn't like some, but this one I really love. This novel talks about a doctor and his family who moved to a town, and right at the backyard of their new house there's a land. Later he discovers that this land is magical and enchanted when his dog dies, and he has to face a very difficult decision of whether to bury his dog in this land or not. This novel is a horror novel, but it's much more than that under the surface. The main theme of this novel is death and grief, and how do we deal with death. Each person has a different type of grief and it shows in this novel. It's very deep and I really like the thoughts and insights that was written in this novel. Next book on my list is The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. Now, this is a very, very famous book, and I think it deserves its fame, it deserves the hype. This novel talks about two boys who live together and play together all the time, but later we discover that they are not equal because of the caste system in Afghanistan. One of them is from the superior caste and the other from the inferior one. Later, a very terrible thing happens to the poor boy at the kite tournament, and the rich boy doesn't do anything to help. So the rich boy lives with the guilt for the rest of his life. It's a very emotional novel and has some sad parts. And I hated the main character so much at times, but I sympathized with him at other parts, so it was a really well-built character. The only thing that I didn't like was the ending of the novel. I felt like it was written to be transformed into a Hollywood movie, so it wasn't that realistic. The final book on my list is called A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. The novel talks about Count Rostov, who is put under house arrest in the Metropole Hotel in Moscow because he is an aristocrat from a bygone era in the opinion of the Bolsheviks who ruled the country at that time. Through the Count's forced stay in this hotel, we learn so much about Russian history through his interactions with the workers at the hotel and the hotel customers. I really enjoyed reading this book. It was very light-hearted. Count Rostov was a very likable character, very well written. The chapters are short, so it reads very fast. And the novel is written beautifully. I really enjoyed every minute of reading it, and there are some really good characters in this novel. Those were the top 10 books I read in 2022. I hope you enjoyed my picks, and hopefully you liked my video. Please like and subscribe, and I hope you watch my next videos. Thank you very much for watching.